So, welcome to week 7 of Making Sense of Education and Digital Technologies, or Learning and Digital Technologies. And we're now going to spend this evening looking at some aspects around leadership to do with digital technologies and how we can promote the integration of digital technologies and ICTs into schools and other educational organisations more effectively by having a better understanding of the leadership involved. Now, many of you may be in a position to be leaders in your organisations, or you may just need to learn more about the various leadership roles so you can better do your job by better understanding and supporting the leaders that exist in your organisation. But of course, everyone can be a leader to certain extents. Now, with your assignment due at the end of the week, you may have some questions about that. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about your assignment at this point.
One question I had, Jason, is I'm up to the section of my assignment, which is usefulness of predictions to inform decision making with the system model. Can I create a new system model based from the data that I collected from my Delphi study for that section, or is that too much?
Well, certainly you can. Normally, the task was structured so that you did the system model first, and that informed the questions that you would ask in your Delphi study. But if you wish to rearrange that, there's no explicit order that's required, as long as you address all the different areas. So if you're happy to approach it in a different way, I'm happy to accept that, and there'll be no penalty at all involved in you doing it in a different way than that. But the original intent of the system modeling was to help you broaden your questions that you would ask of your experts.
Okay.
But you could use it for other purposes as well. I'm happy for you to go ahead and do that.
Cool, thank you.
Any other questions about the assignment? Sarah, do you have any?
Hey, Jason, can I ask you how to use the results from the Delphi study into the assignment?
Yep. There's a few different sections that you should do that. Let me just go through them. So what have I said here? So you need to describe your expert's initial perspective on the challenges faced. So there you'll describe their responses to the questions and what their views are on the issues that you've raised in your particular Delphi survey. And then you need to consider their responses, and what that means for you in terms of your understanding of the challenges facing your particular organisation. So one bit is simply just describing what your experts have said, and you can describe the Delphi process and things of that nature in that aspect. But the second part is also very important. That's where you actually unpack what they've actually informed you, how your views may have changed on certain things as a result of your expert advice through the Delphi process. And in the rubric, which is the other aspect you should always consult when you're completing your task, some areas that I'll look for there. The contribution your experts have made to your predictions. So you'll then go forward and create your scenarios, and there should be a link between what your experts have said and the advice that they've given and what you then subsequently develop into your scenarios about what may occur in the future with your organisation. So that's probably the most significant aspect that you should consider from your experts, how their ideas have helped shape your perspectives on the future in relation to the issues that you raised with them. Does that make sense, or would you like me to clarify any other aspects of that?
Thank you. But I still have one question about regarding the two scenarios. Should these two scenarios should be very different with each other, or?
To a certain extent, yes. Basically, the idea is so that you consider various possibilities. If you just had one scenario, then you may be locked into just looking at what everyone already expects to happen. So the idea of having more than one scenario, and in the real world process, you'd probably have several different scenarios that you would explore. But for this assignment, you only have to do 2. But it's to force you to actually consider different possibilities as a result of the introduction of your technologies or other interventions that you've decided to implement that have come out of your Delphi questions. So in order to show best that you've considered a wide range of alternatives, then your scenarios should be fairly different. But there's lots of ways you could do that. One could be that you look at best case and worst case scenarios. You might look at totally different technologies that could be implemented in your organization. It might be completely different approaches. One might be a top-down leadership-driven approach, while another approach might be a bottom-up organizational development approach to the introduction of a particular initiative. I don't particularly mind what you actually consider in terms of your scenarios, just that you've looked at these as possible developments into the future as a result of the changes that you're proposing, and that the changes should come about as a result of what you've learnt from doing the Delphi process.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Emma, do you have any other questions? Otherwise, we'll hop into the readings for this week.
No, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. So this week we had 2 readings. Now, the first one looks at a whole range of perspectives around change in an organization. Let me bring that up for you. So it's a leadership strategy document. Now, the reason we're looking at these approaches is that in any level of organization that you may be part of, you'll have opportunities to be leaders. You know, maybe just in your own classroom. If you're in a course and you're doing some things, there'll be opportunities to show some aspects of leadership. Now, of course, you may also aspire to be a leader in an organization, a school principal or a district coordinator or an ICT coordinator. There's a whole range of different possibilities at all different levels, from the classroom all the way through to being involved in governmental policy making. So, excuse me, what this document does is goes through some of the different strategies that you can explore in terms of leadership and how they can affect the effective use of technology in an organization. So it's called, was it Leadership Learning in an Online World? And it's been developed by a particular Ministerial Council on Education, Employment, Training and Youth Affairs, which is one of our highest level organisations in Australia, where all of our ministers of education from each of the states get together and work out what should happen in terms of education in Australia. But there are similar organisations and documents internationally. So the first aspect is around leadership capability. So this is the capability of the leaders and the priorities that they place on various things in relation to the issues that we're concerned about, and in particular around technology and ICTs. So before we get started, do you want to describe your experiences with leadership around the use of technology, positive or negative? Do you have any examples or anything you could share with us around your experiences with leadership and the introduction or the effective use or continued use of educational technology?
I know that we don't really have a specified ICT person where we are. So at the moment, everyone's going through different components of training. So for us, we don't so much have a leadership component, but it's just more trying to get everyone educated, if that makes sense. So we don't really have much in the way of a leadership policy there. Our admin are probably on the same page as us at the moment.
Okay.
When it comes to technology, so.
Yep. And that may be actually an effective approach where you've got very much a distributed leadership model where everyone is contributing to a certain extent rather than having defined leaders setting the agenda and directing the pace. There are some advantages to that approach. There are also some disadvantages around efficiencies and so forth. But it can be a viable approach to build, particularly it's good for building consensus and a common perspective. It just can sometimes take quite a bit longer.
Yeah.
And Sarah, do you have any examples of leadership around ICT and digital technologies?
Yeah, I'm currently working as a part-time in an RTO school. So this school they recruit international students, but normally they use the business app and online website. They use this technology to like put students' information in, and for tutors who can mark the students' attendance like that. So our leader invited the technology expert to come to our school and to educate every staff like how to use the business app.
Okay, yes. Yeah. So they brought in a trainer to provide leadership around everyone's understanding of the use of technology?
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's keep going through the document in some detail. So leaders generally establish some priorities for an organization as to what the focus will be. And they can range from a whole spectrum of aspects of ICT. At one level, it may be making sure everyone is competent in the use of various technologies, such as the learning management system for the online courses and so forth. It may also be around equipping their staff with the knowledge and skills to use these various technologies, like video conferencing or word processing, and all those fundamental aspects. It can be identifying the various roles that people are going to play. So having an IT support person or someone that has a particular expertise in online assessment or online course delivery or multimedia development. There can be a whole range of specific skill sets that people have, and that may be identified and the people given specific roles in relation to that. But can also be developing partnerships with other organisations. In a classroom, it may be organising partnerships between parents and teachers, or the school and the local community, or bringing in outside experts and working in that structure. And increasingly with online technologies, it may be partnerships with other organisations, so that one school may not necessarily offer all the online courses. They may offer one or two, and they rely upon other schools to offer other specific courses, so that the effort involved in developing all that material can be shared across a number of organisations. So it can be a range of different priorities that leaders can identify and place on different aspects of technology. But there's also an important aspect around not every school leader or organisation leader necessarily has a lot of skill in the use of technology themselves, but also in how to actually utilise technology to enhance an organisation. So there's a list of skills and knowledges and attitudes that contemporary leaders are expected to have these days. One is around the community and student expectations around the use of technology, and also to utilise student expertise and having an engaging environment for the students. But that also is important for the staff as well, so that staff and teaching staff in particular know how to actually teach with technology effectively. That's their pedagogy, but also administrative staff in terms of supporting the organisation. It might be down to student enrolments or behaviour management systems, or just taking attendance and managing parent interactions with the school. There can be a whole range of different uses of ICT that are increasingly important in that respect. One of the biggest things we've faced in education, particularly in K-12 education, is around email. And there we went through various periods where parents had an expectation of being able to contact teachers 24/7 almost. And over time that's been modified, and in some organisations they've restricted access for parents to get direct access to teachers, and they've had them go through administrative staff before they can then email or have messages passed on to teachers, while other organisations and schools have adopted the philosophy of parents being able to communicate directly to teachers, and have accepted that challenge and developed a community-based process around that. What are your thoughts around the use of technology to communicate between teachers and parents and students and other interested bodies?
We keep ours very basic. We've got Facebook pages, we've got like newsletters that are both digital and print as well, but that's pretty much all that we use at the moment.
Okay. And are staff expected to or encouraged to contribute to the Facebook page on a regular basis?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. So we're given for the newsletter and everything, we're asked to contribute in different ways. So yes, we are. Some of the primary teachers, I can't remember what it's called. Is it called Class Dojo? Is that right? A lot of our primary teachers use that kind of tool, but being a high school teacher, it's a little bit harder to use something. So.
Yes. Now, Class Dojo is a nice environment that's set up whereby teachers can have a little bit more control over the sharing of information to parents, and they can manage it a little bit more efficiently as use of Facebook. So instead of having to email a whole lot of individual parents, you can place things up on collective websites such as Facebook or Class Dojo, and have the parents that are interested access the information from a central location. Sarah, what about yourself? Have you been involved in communicating with your students or potentially their parents, etc., through email or other forms?
I don't have teaching experience, so but I do, because because I studied the English language in Galley, which is Griffiths English Language Center, and I got like teachers' Facebook page, so we communicate with each other even after I graduated the English course. Yeah.
Yes, and that can be a positive to the use of these communication tools, the ability to maintain an ongoing communication relationship with students.
Absolutely. I think the communication, the relationship between teacher and a student is quite important. So it can help students to like motivate students to study if they have a good relationship with teachers.
Absolutely, and it can also extend beyond that as the students move into professions, and teaching being very much around relationships, it is a little bit problematic in that we often cease relationships at the end of courses or school years and things of that nature. But of course, there's a whole range of issues around that, particularly in K-12 education, around potentially inappropriate relationships. And so that has caused a lot of concern around the use of communication tools, particularly communication tools that can have an ongoing communication with students. So there needs to be some consideration given to the potential negative consequences of maintaining relationships with students. But that said, we still want to have strong, positive educational relationships with students. We just need to make sure that they stay within the expectations of our community around the sorts of relationships that should be maintained and sustained with students.
Yeah, but I'm also think like it is difficult to divide the personal life and the work. Such as, so if like K-12 school teachers, they have the Facebook, right? But they would not, normally they would not share their personal account with the students or student parents. They will use a work account. to communicate with students normally like that. Is that right?
Absolutely, and many teachers do maintain multiple social media type environments because of that very issue. So we need to understand that community expectations on teachers is quite significantly different to what's permitted in the rest of society. It's not that long ago when teachers had to get permission to marry and a whole range of other aspects, and were restricted in what they could, how they could dress, and a whole range of aspects that were imposed on them by various systems. Of course, those days have now gone, but there is still a range of expectations that teachers are held to a higher standard, primarily because of the modelling role of teachers, in that a lot of learning occurs through the modelling of teachers in the classroom environments. And it's not just about the content of what they're learning, but also about how they behave and a whole range of other social interactions. And because that modelling is such a primary focus of the learning process, inappropriate modelling can have an equivalent significant impact upon students. So it's a challenge, and it's one that education and the teaching profession and all educational professions are continuing to have to come to grips with, particularly as online technologies make our non-school time activities much more visible and potentially open for students to have a greater understanding of what teachers do outside of school time than we may like them to have an understanding of. But okay, let's move on then. There's a few other aspects around capacity building, and this is what leaders spend a fair bit of their time doing, is building up the capacity of their organisation to respond to threats and challenges, but also opportunities, and to improve the organisation. So one is around workforce and building the capacity of the workforce, and primarily that's often around teachers. So around employing new teachers and making sure that new teachers to an organisation have an appropriate set of skills that can contribute to these technology agendas, but also around looking at the range of new technologies as they emerge and the new software and systems, and being able to evaluate them and not just respond to sales pitches. This can be a challenge. The introduction of electronic whiteboards was a big example of this, where there was a very strong sales pitch around schools needing to install interactive whiteboards in all their classrooms. And that was done very effectively, and most schools implemented widespread introduction of digital and electronic whiteboards. And over time, they were found not to be as effective educationally as was initially promised. And in the main, most of them were fairly poorly used. So good educational leaders need to have enough understanding of technology and software and how they would fit within the system of a school to ensure that they're not making mistakes that can often be quite expensive and potentially have a negative impact upon student learning, as interactive whiteboards and digital projectors did have for a while, where we moved from a trend towards more constructivist pedagogies back towards a more instructivist pedagogy with the advent of being able to do digital PowerPoint presentations so easily. It had a fairly negative impact upon teachers' pedagogy. So there needs to be an ongoing process of that, and it should extend to all staff, but particularly to leaders who make decisions on these issues. Any comments around some of those aspects?
No, sorry.
Now, the idea for these sessions is for you guys to do a lot of talking. Well, I give you some prompts and we get some conversations happening. I don't want to just have this seen as me reading through the notes that you could very easily read on your own. But we'll keep moving forward. Okay, so the next little aspect is around leadership responsibility. So one of the aspects around technology is improving the educational experience and broadening the pedagogy available to teachers, particularly to include constructivist and experiential learning opportunities, but also to permit personalised and collaborative and connected and interactive learning. All these buzzwords, but technology can assist in many of those aspects. So that's fundamentally one of the main arguments for the introduction of technology. We shouldn't just be arguing for the introduction of technology and the use of technology in schools simply because everyone's doing it or because it's technology and technology should be good. There needs to be a solid educational purpose for the introduction of any technology, as you'll need to do in your second assignment for your implementation plans. You'll need to craft an argument for your, excuse me, for the initiatives that you're proposing. And they should be around improving the learning experience of the students. And there can be a whole range of ways of doing that. One is around improving the pedagogies that are available, different ways of teaching. But the other is around addressing some of the challenges that we've faced in education. And you can remember those challenges we discussed in the Horizon reports. And in particular around things such as personalised learning or differentiation. That's been a long-term challenge in education, and technology offers some potential to address that challenge. But also around collaborative learning, in particular when we start looking at collaborative learning outside of the local school and being able to collaborate with experts around the world or with students in other countries, or getting involved in competitions and other particular opportunities that many schools may not have had if they had to rely upon what was available locally. But then the whole aspect around interactive learning, where the use of multimedia and other aspects such as game-based learning can improve the learning experience for students so that they're more engaged, both cognitively and motivationally, with the learning activities, so that it may help them learn things more effectively through the use of visualizations and interactive simulations, but also that they're more engaged with the learning because they feel it's more fun and less boring and just busy work type activities. Any thoughts from any of those comments?
I think it's really I kind of liked this document because you can see in a lot of schools, and I know that we're trying to do it out here, like they're trying to implement this a lot more. They're trying really, really hard to try and make this something that all schools have and that all students can have access to, which it's quite nice to see. Like even for us in the middle of nowhere, we're trying really, really hard to try and implement ICT, even though it's very low levels, but it's just nice to see it finally happening, because I know when I was at school, I think I learned PowerPoint presentation and that was probably about it for my ICT exposure at school. So yeah, that's what I find quite pleasant about it, that aspect.
No, absolutely. And Sarah, do you have any examples where you've used ICT more in your own learning, or how it's being led in your organizations?
Yeah, because I'm not good at ICT, so it's quite challenging when I like I need to use new technology to do assignment or to or in study or work or work. So but I still need to update myself to learn more ICT, to learn more how to use technology. And I also agree with Emma. She just mentioned about the what is that? It's implement of ICT at school, because I think that the leader should think about a lot of things at school, such as how many computers they need to buy, what kind of other ICT resources they need to offer to their students, like that. So there's so many issues. They have to figure it out.
They do, and those are the sorts of things that we're going to be exploring this evening, so that when you're in a leadership position, you'll be able to figure it out and support your organisation to more effectively use ICT. So let's look at some of the other aspects. One thing a leader should encourage and ensure is in place is a shared vision of how ICT is going to be used in an organisation and how it's going to improve student learning. And one of the things that you're going to do in your second assignment is to create a vision statement detailing what you would like to see happen, and then work out how to get people to come on board with that vision and how to implement it. So setting that vision is very important, and it's one of the key roles of a leader. It's easy to follow other people's visions, but to actually take a leadership stance and set a vision and get people to come on board with that vision can be a challenge. But you don't have to be the main organisational leader to do that. You may be just a teacher in a classroom and convince your principal that there should be this particular vision, and get them on board, and then get other staff on board and develop a leadership role without necessarily being the hierarchical top leader in an organisation. But another important aspect is modelling your own effective use of ICT and technology. One of the big aspects of learning is around seeing it modelled by your teachers and other people, but it's also important for other staff and maybe the leaders in your organisation to see your effective use of technology. Because if you're making effective use of it, then it lends weight to your arguments that others should also make effective use of the technology. And particularly if you can show the advantages of that through your own work, often through communication, but also through educational and just general management, being able to manage your organisation and the various processes and aspects of a job through the use of technology. So it may be involved in use of spreadsheets, or creating a website to help coordinate a project, or using an online project management tool to plan out a project and assign roles and make sure those various tasks are completed. So there's a whole range of ways that a teacher can show the effectiveness of ICT use through their own practice, not just through what they teach. But leaders should also support teams and other leaders in their organisation, develop their staff and their capability, improve learning approaches, and making sure that they're inclusive of everyone in the organisation, all the students and all the staff. Wherever possible, personalise things. That's one of the biggest advantages of technology, is the ability for it to be able to be differentiated to different people and their different needs. Because it's so much cheaper than non-technological solutions, we can often implement more than one approach. So if one teacher or one group of teachers wants to teach with an instructivist pedagogy using PowerPoint presentations and fairly lecture-based, then technology can support that. While other teachers may want to do a more group-based, constructivist, project-based learning approach, and the technology can support that as well. And very often it can support both at the same time, where in the past we might have been more focused around getting everyone to do a particular approach. But it could also give us lots of data that we can then use to make policy judgments and management processes informed by the data, rather than just what we think might be the best way to do things, or what we've seen a consultant or at a conference suggest what we should do. Actually making decisions based upon the data that you collect can ensure, or help ensure, that the approaches that you're going to put in place are appropriate for your particular organisation. It's very easy to go and find approaches that have been used elsewhere and just implement those in an organisation, but unless you're very lucky, they won't fit exactly the needs of your particular organisation, and you can have some quite major mistakes occur by just taking what's worked well somewhere else and trying to replicate that without understanding the differences between the two organisations and the particular needs. Does anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. My school has we've just put in a grant to apply for about 30 iPads, I think, and we've myself and another teacher, we're being sent to an Apple PD in about 2 weeks' time. We're getting sent to Rocky for it, so that we have that, so that her and I could be trained in utilising these. So they thought, well, we'll get you trained through Apple, since they're the ones who created them. So in that way, our school's doing that. So I'm quite looking forward to actually going and playing with iPads and everything for an entire day. But in that sense, we're excited too, because we're going to be getting those if the grant goes through, which means that, yeah, we can begin to implement that back into the school. So I know that's something I'm really excited about that's coming up for me in the next couple of weeks.
That sounds like a great opportunity.
Yeah.
But remember,
yeah.
But remembering too, you're going to hear, hopefully at your PD, a whole range of different approaches that have been used in other schools.
Yes. And that's something I am looking forward to, because I mean, PDs are so great because you get to meet all these other teachers. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how all of these other teachers have been using it and how they already, I'm guessing most of the people who are there already implement those devices. So yeah, it'll be really, I think it's going to be really great.
Absolutely. But the lesson of this particular aspect is to make sure that when you come back and implement those ideas, that you try and do them informed by the needs of your particular school and your classrooms, and so that they fit in with what your particular circumstances, which may be limited access to the internet, for example. It's quite easy to do a lot of interesting things if you've got a lot of fast internet access, but if you don't have that, then you may need to modify various approaches, or it may be also, if different approaches that have been done where every student has a device might be different to if you've only got a couple of devices per student for groups of students. So yeah, just bringing it back to the point raised in this particular document, that you need to look at the actual needs of your own school and make sure that the plans fit to that. But that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks as well. So hopefully that'll be of some help when you plan out what to do with all these wonderful new iPads. Okay, and the final point there is, again, what you've alluded to, is collaborating beyond the school to learn from other groups and organizations and how they're doing things, and getting involved. And getting involved with Apple can be a very useful approach, and indeed a number of schools have gone the full step to having staff become Apple Distinguished Educators, and there's also a number of Queensland schools which are Apple Distinguished Schools, where they've got a special relationship with Apple, and they do lots of PD then with those schools because of their particular focus around that particular technology. But that extends also to other organizations such as Google and Microsoft, and also Adobe, who have similar relationships with schools and the various products and technologies that they're incorporating. Okay. Next bit is around school leadership knowing the possibilities of ICT. One of the difficulties with technology is because it's always changing and always new. Very often it's difficult for leaders to keep up with what's possible with digital technologies and ICT. So for example, the whole new areas that have emerged around robotics and drones and other aspects such as virtual reality and augmented reality, many school leaders may not be aware of what these offer for education. And it's an important role of a school leader to keep up to date with what's occurring in education and with the use of technology in education. And they may do that through conferences or reading journals or just seeing what's being done in other schools. But it's an important aspect. And there are a whole range of different elements of that. One is around having the goals to improve student learning. and keeping an eye out for what's working really well to improve student learning outcomes, but also keeping an eye out to what's happening around the safety involved with students in these environments. That's something that principals and school leaders often take a particular note of. Of course, it can have a significant impact upon the school environment if something is being found to be problematic and causing concern in the community or with students around online tools and online communications and so forth. But also around making sure that there's equitable access and all students have got access to the various resources and learning opportunities available through technology. And that can be a big challenge, but there's a range of different approaches schools have explored to address that around BYOD programs and leasing programs and grants and other approaches to try to ensure that everyone has got access to the same learning opportunities. And also to consider some of the really fundamental changes to education around online learning and blended learning and the opportunities they support. We haven't done a particularly good job of that in recent years in Australia, where overseas there's a lot more focus around the use of online learning in K-12. We do quite a good job at the tertiary level, but nowhere near as strong as some of our counterparts in the United Kingdom and in the USA and in Canada are currently doing around that aspect. Any comments on any of those elements? Sarah, you might have some comments around the use of online learning. Have you seen that increase?
Sorry, could you please repeat your question again?
Have you seen more and more use of online learning in the educational organisations you've been involved in?
Yeah, I think online learning is a very good idea, and I think one of my friends, he has already learned a couple of courses through MOOC, the online learning website, and it's really like doing a degree at university, and they can learn a lot. So my friend also suggested me to do that if I have time like that, and I think the Kehan, is that right? Kehan, he's a
yep.
founder of the online learning Kehan website. I'm not sure how to spell it.
Yep.
Yeah, and
I like the Khan Academy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Emma. I just read the story of Kehan, because why he just why he designed this website, because of he want to provide educational resource to his nephews who are in other countries, in poor countries. So I think it's a very good idea to help students in regional area, or like if they can't pay higher tuition fee. Yeah. And another university called the University of People is wholly the courses are wholly delivered online. I think that one is also a very good idea.
Yes, absolutely. You've touched on a number of the major innovations happening in the online space with the Khan Academy, particularly around short video clips. Although he's now moving more towards use of artificial intelligence to guide students through those sort of clips and small micro lessons, and the MOOCs, which the massive online open courses, which have been very popular in various communities, where you've got experts from around the world put on free courses and allow any number of students to participate in the courses, and they can have upwards of 50 to 100,000 people in a course. Again, they offer different opportunities and advantages, but they also have some disadvantages and challenges around some of those approaches as well. The main one is around the relationship building, which is a fundamental aspect of education, and it's more difficult to achieve in very large online environments, but not impossible. There are ways of addressing those challenges and incorporating those, and that's one of the things that educational leaders need to be familiar with and exploring. Emma, did you want to have anything to say on any of those aspects?
Not really. I do find the online learning tools really interesting. I really love that Khan Academy video that you posted. I found that really, really interesting. So I've actually been looking at some of those at the moment, just like out of interest and even picking up a couple of skills. But yeah, something I'd like to explore a bit more perhaps.
Yes, the whole aspect around micro-teaching and having very short video clips that explain concepts has, well, it's revolutionizing the way students learn. Most students now do watch YouTube clips almost predominantly as their entertainment source, but also as their learning source. It's their go-to place if they want to learn something, be it in maths or science or geography. They'll go and look for a YouTube clip that explains it. I might do the same if I'm cooking something or trying to learn a new particular skill, but very often our students use it for fundamental aspects of what we would have considered more traditionally part of the teacher's role of explaining concepts. And the idea that now that students, if they don't get the concept from their teacher, they'll go and look for a whole range of other explanations that can often be of a higher quality than how the teacher explained a particular concept. And that changes the dynamic in a classroom quite significantly. Not necessarily badly, because there's good teachers can incorporate that into the learning process and improve student learning through that engagement. But not every teacher understands that students now have got plenty of alternatives if the teacher hasn't explained things to their satisfaction, where in the past they didn't have those alternatives. They had the textbook or the teacher, and that was pretty much it. Sometimes their parents that they could ask questions of. So a few other aspects, providing quality content, services, infrastructure and technical support. This is one of the biggest challenges, not just for the school leader, but also for a classroom teacher, making sure that the students have all got passwords and the internet's working at least relatively effectively, that the website that they were going to go and use as part of the lesson actually still exists or isn't blocked or broken. So the whole range of aspects around just maintaining reliable access to the resources that are going to be used in education is an important aspect at all levels. And then the final one again is around monitoring data. So collecting data about student learning, monitoring that, reviewing it, and using it to inform and improve the student learning process. Okay, so a few other things. Next one is particularly around pedagogy. So how the teaching process occurs. So good leaders should be making sure that everyone in their organization knows about different approaches to teaching with technology. One of the biggest popular ones has been around the flipped classroom approach, where students study content out of school hours and spend the in-school hours working through problem sets and getting support from their teachers to engage with the content, rather than having the content presentation occurring during school time. That's been a very popular strategy in K-12. Not as popular in higher education, mostly because it's more difficult to get students such as yourselves to do the readings prior to coming to the sessions. But in a K-12 environment, that's more easy to manage. But it's also connecting people with the knowledge about the new technologies with each other. So in establishing professional development programs and teachers sharing what they've learnt and propagating knowledge about how to do these various approaches within an organization. Making sure everyone's got the resources, such as iPads or internet access, and have got opportunities to learn about how to use those resources. Connecting teachers to each other so that we've got teachers that have learned about how to do certain things sharing those ideas, but also where teachers from, say, different schools or different countries can work together on projects that can do a better job than just a teacher individually in a school or in a country might be able to do. And that's particularly important around some of our cultural subjects, such as learning a language or geography or history, where being able to talk to students in Egypt about ancient Egypt could be a very important aspect of students here in Australia learning about those concepts. But likewise, students in Egypt might be very interested in learning about the flora and fauna of Australia and those aspects. So lots of things there where a school leader can help craft how students' learning is going to occur within an organisation through the effective use of ICT. Then you've got the whole community building aspect, which can be helped by ICT, such as we've found around social media, where we talk about having Facebook sites and so forth to share information with parents, but teachers can also have their own Facebook sites to share and discuss things just amongst teachers. And there's a number of organisational websites that are designed to assist that. In Education Queensland schools, there's a whole set of tools that allow community building and people to work on and share ideas about different approaches to education. But also beyond the school, there can be groups where teachers can communicate internationally. So teachers in Australia can share the ideas of how they're doing different approaches with teachers elsewhere in the world, and also hear about how those teachers in other parts of the world are doing things. And a particular advantage in Australia, now that we've got a national curriculum, where we can share ideas between our states. Each state is doing things slightly differently, and we can share what's working and not working and learn from each other in that respect. But we can also use ICT to seek feedback from teachers, particularly the idea of being able to seek feedback anonymously. So having, as a school leader or an organisation leader, taking polls, getting people to express their ideas and thoughts about how things could be improved. And as a classroom teacher, you could do that same with your students. Having your students rate your performance, and often that can be done more effectively if it can be done anonymously, and being able to then respond to that rating, as we do at a university level, where we have surveys of students, their experiences in the teaching of various courses, and also of the overall quality of the courses, so that the organisation can then improve upon those aspects. But as a good leader, you should be encouraging effective feedback, so that it's not just the people doing things that make decisions about what should be done in the future, but also being informed by other stakeholders, be that parents or community or students or other teachers, so that you're not just doing it all on your own.
Jason, does that cover the student opinion surveys that the Ed Queensland promotes? I noticed they've just gone out recently. Is that same? Is that same kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, it does. And Education Queensland's fairly good on this, in that they do surveys of parents and students fairly regularly, and principals do take that into consideration. I've had to come into a number of schools and work with them to develop a more comprehensive data collection when they've identified problems as a result of those surveys.
So do those surveys give enough data? So I normally never fill it out, or I don't really know much about them, but do they give enough data to a school about things like whether or not they need to implement more ICT within the school?
In the main, I'd say no. They do give quite a good longitudinal data about whether or not things are improving or getting worse in an organisation. And you can see that over like 10 years. And that can then trigger a principal to say, okay, we've got something that's progressively getting worse and worse around behaviour management or around student learning outcomes at the end of year 12. And that can then trigger a more comprehensive study of what's happening in the school to address those issues. The surveys themselves probably don't give enough information to be able to make valid decisions on what's happening, because schools are very complex places, and there could be a whole range of reasons why certain trends are occurring. But they do tell you that the trends are there.
Okay.
Excuse me. So other aspects around those things around having better connections between home and school. That's a perennial problem with schools. So that, for example, some schools have now gone to online parent-teacher interviews, so that parents, if they're not able to attend parent-teacher nights, can do a video conference or teleconference in and have the interviews with their teachers remotely. So a whole range of issues around that. Or around schools creating digital portfolios of students' work and sharing those with parents, or creating video tours of the school or of student performances and other achievements, and providing those to parents. So a whole range of other aspects that schools can engage with technology to support that interaction with the home school nexus. So that's, excuse me, a couple other things. The other aspect is around the administrative processes in an organisation. One is making sure that the organisation is future thinking, and we've talked about that before in the course, but also around having standard procedures. We call those standard operating procedures. Now, these can be challenging, but over time, when they're effective, they can improve an organisation, so that, for example, the same software installed on all the computers, so that you can go to any computer and be confident that it'll be set up and work as you expect it to. So a whole set of processes around that can be effective. They can also, as we said, build that communication between teachers, students, and the school community. A big part of that is around communication. So putting out articles of what students are achieving through the school newsletter. But that same newsletter now can be put onto the website. It can be put onto Facebook pages. It can be emailed. It can be sent to the local community radio station or newspaper. And of course, things are digital now. Things can be shared and communicated much more effectively. But you can also use technology to improve the management processes around resources. So having an online booking system, for example, for the iPads, so that teachers can get equal or fairer access to the resources that are available in an organisation, but also potentially sharing those resources with other organisations, such as your feeder primary schools. So if they're not being used in the high school, being able to share robotic kits and iPads and other tools with other organisations. And generally having an overall plan for continuous improvement. That's a big focus in many organisations nowadays, just as it could be a plan for an individual teacher. The approach I always give is that each teacher should make sure that they're implementing one new innovative thing every term. And by doing that regularly, very quickly you've got an ongoing process of continuous improvement, where in a year you've got 4 major new initiatives. In 5 years you've got 20-odd major new initiatives, and it's fairly easy to then cope with one new initiative each term. But over a relatively small amount of time, that can snowball into quite a significant amount of innovation and change. And that can happen at a classroom level or school level or a national level. Any comments on any of those aspects? How about yourselves? How do you go about ensuring continuous improvement in your own lives or teaching organisations?
I just usually I ask for feedback wherever I can, I suppose. I try to do as much research as I can. I've got a really good team in the high school that we work with as well. So I think it's all about feedback. If I'm worried about something, I can ask another person or research, or just, yeah, feedback's the only thing I can kind of come up with.
at the moment that I know that I would do anyway, just seeking that feedback.
Now, feedback is a very important aspect, but there's also other approaches such as doing research and bringing new ideas that you've discovered back into your organisation. But feedback is certainly an important aspect of any improvement strategy. Sarah, how about yourself? Even if it's only in your own learning, do you have any ways of improving how you go about learning?
Yep, I subscribe some like YouTube channels regarding the technology, new technology development. So sometimes I just go watch YouTube to update myself how to use the new technology like that.
No, absolutely. And that's a good modeling of how many of our students now engage with new technology and do their own improvement processes. And it's an important thing for teachers to understand that our students have got various approaches to improving themselves that can extend beyond what we're teaching them how to do things. One of the biggest challenges I know many teachers have is around students' homework and collaboration when they do their homework. Students for many, many years now have been almost uniformly getting together on using social media or video conferencing or FaceTiming and so forth, and working together on their homework, where most teachers had no idea that the tasks that they were setting them were predominantly being done in groups rather than individually. And that's just an example of the uses that technology can be put to. And we need to, in an organisation and in a leadership role in an organisation, have an understanding of that, not just for between our students, but also between our staff. And yeah, it's just an important element of engagement. So the last bit from this particular text is around a set of principles. So principles help guide our decision making, and this is a set of principles that have been advocated in this particular document that schools and school leadership should adhere to. So you've got a range around pedagogy, so making sure that students are engaged with and developing expertise in ICTs. A couple of particular pedagogical approaches that this document focuses on around student-centered, constructivist, interactive and blended learning environments. The promotion of pedagogies that effectively integrate ICT, particularly around personalised and differentiated learning, and monitoring and managing the access to and the impact of ICT on all students. So note, keeping cognizant that there can be negative consequences of the use of ICT, particularly around bullying, but also around the sharing of images and a whole range of other inappropriate uses of technology, which we need to make sure that we're on top of and managing effectively. We need to, though, ensure that the educational outcomes are sound when we use ICT. And that's been one of the biggest criticisms of some of our tablet devices, for example, and the whole controversy around screen time, where the consideration is that students the time that they're spending using devices could be better spent in more traditional approaches to the learning processes. Now, much of that has boiled down to classroom management of the use of technology, where students have managed to do things that they shouldn't be doing, such as spending their time playing games or on social media instead of focused on their learning. But that hasn't necessarily been the fault of the technology. It's been the inappropriate management of that technology. But sometimes the technology is blamed for those processes, and it needs to be considered in an organisation to ensure that teachers know how to effectively use the technology to improve student learning. Then we've got the whole aspect around teachers knowing about how to use that technology to prevent some of those issues we just discussed, but also to improve their own effectiveness as a teacher. So we've seen with PowerPoint presentations, for example, being able to do that instead of having to write things on a whiteboard or a blackboard, we could now prepare things earlier and show them digitally on the screen. But also, teachers could then learn about how to use effective animations and simulations and incorporate those into the learning process, but also around use of technology to support group work and project-based learning, and effective project management and monitoring. So there's a whole range of different things that teachers need to learn about, but also about learning how to manage their own projects. So managing the processes of report card writing by using project management tools to plan out what's going to be involved in managing their time, or using tools that assist in the report writing processes. There's comment banks and a whole range of other technological tools that can assist teachers in their own work other than the actual teaching process. So any examples, say from that where you've used technology to improve your management processes of how you manage your own work, rather than just for teaching, but how you've used ICT to improve your own work processes?
I haven't so much, but I know another teacher I work with, he actually films himself teaching, not with the kids there, only him, but he films himself doing a lesson, and then he actually goes back and then watches that lesson to see if there's anything he can then pick up on. And he does that quite often. He's a beginning teacher, and yeah, he does that quite a lot. And then he then logs that on like a blog type thing, so he can actually see his progression as he works. And he's been using that when he has these professional development conversations with the boss. So yeah, I just thought that was something someone else was doing.
No, absolutely, and that's a very high-level use of self-reflective use of technology. There are a few schools where they've implemented that as a widespread practice, and in fact, they've got cameras in all the rooms, and the teachers get together once a week, and they review each other in a very supportive way, and everyone helps identify how they could improve their various lessons. And that whole self-reflective feedback process can be very effective at an organizational level or at an individual level to have that self-improvement cycle. Sarah, do you have any examples where you've used technology or know of use of technology that helps improve the way you work or the approaches you do to doing things?
Yeah, I think calendar is a very good example because I use calendar every day. It helps me it reminds me what I should do today. And I also think the Google Docs is a good way to save documents. So I don't need to bring USB or any other things every day. I just save the documents that I need or I think is important into the Google Docs. It will save time to organize my work or study.
No, absolutely, and both of those technologies have got lots of opportunities. Online calendaring can be very, very effective, particularly when it's shared with others, where you can have a whole school calendar that's shared to all the teachers and students, and you can have individual classes then that add their own calendars, and then individuals can have their own calendar stuff put on there. And so the idea is that lots of people can contribute to that without having to rely upon everyone doing their own individual work. Similarly with tools such as Google Docs, where you've got online tools that can be then very easily shared, and you can share a copy with other people, and you can also work collaboratively on a document with other people. But you also mentioned some of the key aspects around ICT management, where it keeps an online copy, and it also keeps every change that you've ever made to a document, and you can revert back to wherever it was in the past, so you never lose your documents. And yeah, there's a lot of advantages around that particular technological tool. So again, some useful examples around various aspects of technology. So last few principles that should be adhered to. Things should be evidence-based. Okay, again, I've mentioned this a couple of times this evening. The use of ICT should always be based around objective evidence, not just the hype that's often generated around new technologies, but also around the technology itself can assist in gathering that evidence. We mentioned the video and videoing performance and having that as an evidence trail. And so now that teacher can very easily show over a course of a year or 2 years how they've changed as a teacher, and all of that evidence is available to make those decisions on. That's being done in a lot of classrooms, particularly primary school classrooms, where we've got digital portfolios where teachers take photos of students' work almost on a continuous basis, but also record the students as they're speaking and saying their spelling words or their numbers, and then being able to show students how they've progressed in 3 months' time or 6 months' time. And that can really make a much more effective reflective learning process where students can see success occurring, and that can then motivate them towards greater success. So lots of aspects around the use of ICT to collect evidence and then use that evidence to make informed and positive contributions to students' learning or the management processes in an organisation. Also got those principles around management, making sure that everyone is involved in the planning and the use of ICT so that you don't have silos and resistors and all the rest. Encouraging that improvement cycle and efficiencies in all different aspects, keeping that focus on collecting evidence and using the capabilities of technology to collect that evidence really effectively. And one of the principles they advocate here is making things transparent so that everyone knows what resources are available, for example, in a school. Everyone knows how it's being shared out equally, where the monitoring of student progress is available to any teacher that may need to find out about that at any time. Making things much more transparent allows much more efficient planning processes and management processes, whereas if you keep that knowledge to just a few people, then those that could make use of that knowledge to improve the organisation don't have access to it. And then the final one is around partnerships and the idea that we can extend beyond the school. We can involve parents, the local community, the international community through the use of technology in the learning processes and management processes and organisational processes in an educational organisation. And that's probably one of the most long-term beneficial aspects of technology in schools, where we can take the responsibility away from just having that one school or one teacher being solely responsible for the students' learning, and incorporating experts and other organisations and communities from all around the world to contribute to students' learning, and the multiplying effect that that can have. So any comments around some of those principles? Okay then. So we'll finish up this document with a couple of the realising possibilities. So the idea that we can use technology to help transform the learning environment and transform teaching and learning, but also transform management and how we actually manage an organisation. And that's one of the key things that you'll need to incorporate into your implementation plan for your second assignment. So not just how you're going to transform how students learn, but also how you're going to transform the organisation to make it more efficient and effective through the use of technology or the strategies that you've incorporated. And that can often be incorporated by enhancing collaboration between staff and students and other, and creating a really vibrant educational community through those processes. And there's a range of different points there that you can then take advantage of, and these can be some of the outcomes that you want to achieve in your implementation plan. And a few final points. You need to make sure that the plan that you put in place is still professional. that it involves everyone, that it maintains the expectations of the community, maintains the expectations of your students and their parents and the teachers and all the other people that are involved in the organisation. And professional learning is always a key aspect that is often forgotten in implementation plans developed by governments and other organisations, but is a very important one for teachers, making sure that the teaching staff, but also the school leadership, has the skills and capabilities to implement the plans that are proposed. It's fairly easy to come up with some really great ideas, but actually how to have those implemented in an organisation is the real challenge. And one of the key aspects is making sure that the staff and all the staff, including the teaching staff that have to improve the student learning, but also the leadership staff that have to implement the changes, have the skills needed to be able to do so. And that's a key aspect around developing leadership capability. One of the difficulties in some organisations is where the leadership capability is restrained to just one or two individuals. Really good organisations distribute that capability across a large number of people, including the students, allowing students to have a leadership role in the school, also allowing parents through parents and citizens and parents and friends types organisations, but also the external community, all having an authentic say in how the school works and how these decisions are implemented. And by having a much wider leadership focus can be much more effective. But that capacity has to be built in all those groups. You can't just expect, say, a group of students to come up with really good contributions to the school's management without giving them developing their capability to do so. Likewise with parent groups and community groups, etc. And then the final bit as part of all that is developing leadership over time, making sure that there's processes in place to improve teacher leadership, but also school student leadership and other groups. And that continuous cycle of improvement also includes the capacity for change and the capacity to manage these innovative processes. Okay, any questions or comments about any of those aspects?
No.
Okay then. So that's the first document that hopefully you've had a chance to read or will now read in more detail, because this helps inform how you're going to implement your own plan to effect a change in an educational organisation for your assignment. But we do have another document to look at, and let's bring that one up unless anyone's got any other questions or comments about any of the other aspects that we've talked about so far. Okay. Let me just get the other one ready. Now, can you see the whole document? Okay, looks like you can see it now. So this one is designed to help make these sorts of things happen in an organisation. Let's get down to the elements. So this is 10 elements that you should consider in your implementation plans on how to effect change in your classroom or school or educational organisation. The first one is around personalising and extending student learning. The second one is around enabling leadership. Third one around supporting professional learning, connecting learning beyond the school, improving student assessment and reporting, developing, measuring and monitoring student ICT capability, assessing and utilising student information, providing, accessing and managing teaching and learning resources, automating business processes within a school, and providing reliable infrastructure. So these were identified as 10 key elements that need to be addressed in having a vibrant 21st century digital learning environment. So the first one is around personalising and extending student learning. And this document takes this from 3 different levels: a developing school perspective, where a school is just exploring how to do these things, a school that is accomplishing this particular element, and a school that is leading this element and showing how other schools could be going beyond the element. And there's various factors in each of these. So in relation to personalising and extending student learning, a developing school will be making school ICT decisions to meet immediate needs, while an accomplished school is supporting a coherent curriculum framework, and a leading school is, what are they doing in addition? Enhancing it. So, okay. But the real aspect there is whether or not you're just responding to the immediate needs, or whether or not you've got an overall plan for how to improve student learning through the use of technology and ICT. And again, the aspect around differentiation, how the school is going about looking at how technology can personalise learning for all of their students. Then there's the integration of ICT into the content that the students are learning, and how that's being integrated into the various aspects. How well students are being able to independently use technology to support their learning and self-regulate their use of technology, whether or not they're just using the technology to play games and use social media, or whether or not they're actually using it to support their projects and other learning activities that they're working on. And the final one is around developing detailed pathways, planned progressive development of students' understanding of the use of ICT, and how that improves from year to year as the students get better and better at it. Comments about element 1, personalising and extending student learning. Where would you see your own learning organisation being at?
I'd say we probably sit as at accomplished. I don't think we're quite leading, but I think we're actually maybe in between developing accomplished, because we've got enough for what we have. But yeah, I'm just reading those other criteria there.
And Sarah, how about yourself? Or how would you rate Griffith?
Maybe between the developing to accomplished.
Yep, that's fair enough. And any particular example you would have?
I don't know how to describe the example for this one. But
okay.
Yeah, I think I'm belonging to between these 2 models, because I'm not quite good at doing assignment at the moment. So
fair enough. Okay, let's look at the next element, enabling leadership. So accomplished schools have a clearly articulated vision and are working towards incorporating that into everything to do with the school, allocating responsibilities for leadership more broadly rather than just to a couple of people, empowering and supporting staff in the use of ICT at a range of different levels, having effective plans on how to do the various processes and implementation strategies that have been decided upon, and using a whole school model. So not just having it occurring in silos or different departments or classes, but having some sort of comprehensive approach to the integration of ICT throughout the school. So any comments upon enabling leadership?
Jason, is there an expectation of where schools should be sitting from this framework?
Well, yes, there is in terms of the writing of this particular framework, it really is encouraging and promoting the idea that schools should be moving towards the accomplished school approach, with some schools being leading schools. It's almost impossible to have every school being a leading school, because the way these documents are framed, they're often doing things out of the ordinary, and if everyone's doing something, then it becomes ordinary. But yes, there is certainly the idea that the majority of schools at the moment would be developing, and the intent is to move them towards accomplishing, and for some to be moved towards leading.
Okay.
What tends to happen then is that we don't move everyone towards leading, we just reframe a new set of criteria that puts everyone back in developing, and we have a new set of standards that moves people to the next level up. But these are all progressive documents. They're designed to support change and encourage improvement, but yeah, they'll never be a set of criteria that remains static and everyone achieves, because at that point we'll develop a new set of standards to help people move even further along. And we do the same in education with curriculum documents. 10 years ago, probably everyone would be achieving, if we'd kept the same curriculum documents that we've had 10 years ago, we probably would have had most of our schools and students achieving at the very highest levels of them. So we need to keep reframing them every decade or so that we can keep progressing what's expected. Well, of course, we'll have some people that have different perspectives on that and say that we were achieving more 10 years ago than we are now, but the evidence is quite overwhelming that we achieve far more now in education than was ever attempted several decades ago. Okay, so the next one is around supporting professional learning. Again, one of the areas that is often neglected. Of course, it's much easier for governments and education departments to focus on other aspects of planning. Putting money into improvement of teachers is sometimes seen as wasted effort. Of course, it's harder to measure and harder to see direct evidence of improvement. But the evidence from research is that it's one of the most fundamental aspects of long-term improvement, and one of the areas that has the most significant gains, because teachers are seen as having one of the greatest impact upon student performance, other than a whole range of other aspects such as better technical support and a whole lot of other elements that are incorporated into these plans. But that said, it's not often transitioned into actual financial support. Though it's been good to note in more recent years that there has been a lot of financial support being put into improving teachers, particularly in Queensland, with a number of programs where the effort and the millions of dollars is going into teacher professional development rather than on equipment or technical resources and infrastructure. So things are changing, but they do tend to be sporadic, and hopefully this is the beginning of a long-term trend, but we'll see if that is sustained. But a range of different particular aspects around what a accomplished school is achieving around professional development. Again, the idea of having a professional development plan for all staff, to monitoring that and having a self-reflective process in place, and a continuous improvement process, and even the expectation that all staff will do professional development programs and improve themselves each year, is not in place in all organisations in education. But that's certainly an element that does tend to have long-term positive benefits. So element 4 is connecting learning beyond the school. And again, different levels of school can be more engaged with that than others. Whether or not a school is just connecting within, well, the first point would be just connecting amongst the classes within a school. So breaking down the silos and even the silos within a single department can be quite strong. But ensuring that teachers and students and other organisational elements in a school are working collaboratively rather than individually. But at the other extreme, it's connecting internationally and working with groups around the world and organisations and so forth. So not just relying upon the resources of a school, but incorporating lots of other opportunities available that are supported by the use of technology. But again, there's a need to have good management processes and practices around that, making sure that there's good technical support available, making sure that new ideas and programs are trialled and explored, and making sure that they work within the school context before they're rolled out and done across the entire school. But eventually, having those programs work across the entire school and having a fully integrated approach to the use of technology. Making sure that parents excuse me, and the community are incorporated into these processes, and making sure you've got plans that inform and educate parents about any new initiatives, but also about giving them a valid say and an opportunity to contribute and participate in such changes. And then there's a range of protocols around safe and ethical use of technology and making sure that they're accepted amongst the whole community and implemented effectively. So lots of different elements there around how to have a connected school. Any comments about any of those aspects? I guess not.
Oh, sorry, I was just reading that last one. I think just by looking at it too, I think only just from my teaching experience, like from my school, it seems that most schools, I've only taught at 2 schools in my teaching career, but most schools try to aim as hard as possible to be in that accomplished area. I'm just reading all the extra criteria, and it just seems to me that most schools probably do aim for this because you obviously need this connection with the community and parents and those sorts of things. And I just think it's quite important. Sorry, I'm probably not making much sense. I'm reading at the same time.
I understand.
But yeah, I'm finding that I'm finding that quite key with what I know. I'm noticing that's quite current with what I've been doing and what I know our school implements. So
absolutely, and that's what should be expected. Unfortunately, sometimes it's in the school rhetoric rather than in the actual practice. But yes, good school plans should incorporate all of these elements. And increasingly in our schools now, there is an expectation of annual planning and an ongoing improvement process in its various contexts. And we should be seeing a lot of these elements included. But not every school plan and school leader is fully aware of the opportunities ICT can contribute to those plans. And this is where these elements can often be incorporated into existing plans where they may not have been highlighted. But you are correct, a lot of good schools should be incorporating a lot of these elements. So next one is around assessment and reporting, and there's a range of uses of technology that can improve those processes. One of the aspects around reporting has always been the timeliness of reporting, so that students and parents can put in place strategies to improve. And we've seen that with the NAPLAN test, where the time for getting the evidence and responses back from those national assessments was quite long and was considered too long for schools to implement effective strategies to improve students, which was the original intent of the testing processes. They hope to improve that through the use of technology with NAPLAN online. And the idea then is to be able to provide feedback almost immediately so that schools can then incorporate that feedback into how they change their teaching for each individual student and meet the individual student's needs as have been identified by those testing processes. But that can be incorporated across the school and even into classrooms, where you can have online quizzes at the end of every lesson to consolidate whether or not students have understood things. They can be automatically assessed, so the teacher doesn't have to only assess when they've got the capacity to do all the marking involved in assessment. The use of online quizzes and testing processes can make that much more efficient and effective, and then provide that feedback to students, but also to teachers, so the teacher can then adjust their next lesson based upon the measured student understanding of their previous lesson, and have that as an immediate feedback process to improve the ongoing lesson planning process. Now, not many schools have got quite to that stage yet, but the technology is there to support that. It's more around changing the pedagogical practice, but also around the use of technology to permit other pedagogies, such as project-based learning, where in the past that's been difficult to manage, of course, of the complexities of student projects, particularly if they're individualized. Excuse me. But now, with technology being able to have students create digital portfolios and project management software, teachers can monitor how students are progressing on their projects, and they could be using, say, Google Docs or a shared document, which they could share with their teacher, and the teacher can then see their progress on a minute-by-minute basis of how they're working on long-term projects, rather than just seeing the results at the end and assessing them and failing them or passing them. They can actually provide interventions that can help improve student progress. How about some comments around that? Okay, Sarah. So one example around that would be, say, for your first assignment, where in a more traditional assignment, you would just be given the task and you would then do the task, and at the end I would mark it and tell you whether or not you've interpreted the task correctly or not. Because we've been using some online tools and some ICT tools, I've been able to see whether or not you've actually crafted some of your survey questions correctly or not, and provided you with some feedback along the way. ICT has enabled that to happen. Now, yes, it's happened previously where we've taken drafts and do that sort of process, but technology can make that drafting process more efficient, particularly when we can bring in some automated processes which can reduce the workload on teachers that has often restricted what they could do around drafting and providing feedback. Okay, element 6. This is again around using technology to get data. Of course, one of the greatest benefits of having things done using technology is that we can get some really good information about what's happening. And in education, we're particularly concerned about what's happening with student learning. And by being able to collect that data, we can then use it in a whole range of ways, primarily to ensure that the students' learning is more effective, identifying when they're having difficulties and putting in place interventions to address those difficulties. But there's lots of other things that we can use around ICTs. We can monitor how well they're using ICTs themselves, so that we can then improve their ability to use ICT. And we can assist with our support staff, so around behaviour management and how many times they go to the school nurse or the medical room, a whole range of other processes we can build in that can address other aspects of the learning environment other than just the teaching and learning processes.
So does that encompass one school?
It can, yes. And at a national level, there's also the My School databases, which allow parents to be able to see the performance of schools. But within a school environment, then you've also got a whole lot of data collection processes that give a snapshot of what's happening in that school. And that information can be provided up and down, down to the teachers so that they get access to information that they need to make decisions around individual students. It can be provided to the school administration so they can make decisions around what needs to be done at a school level amongst various classes and groupings and year levels, but also at a higher level for departments and nationally for national departments to be able to make decisions around priority areas and where resources should be focused to improve schooling nationally. So none of that can really be achieved effectively without data. And in the past, you would have to have people go out to schools and have inspectors and all those sort of processes whereby you took snapshots of what was occurring in schools and made decisions based upon that, which might be a principal turning up to a class and watching a class, or a national inspector turning up to a school and doing an assessment of the school. But being able to collect data almost on a continuous basis provides much more responsive feedback from that data. And we don't quite have it to where we've got continuous data collection happening, but that's sort of the next step available. As we would see, say, in ICT tools such as Facebook, where they make changes to their interface, how things are positioned and what information is put onto those screens, almost on a continuous basis, based upon feedback of hundreds of thousands or millions of people. And they can use that data to really make informed decisions. And if they saw that something really dramatic was happening, such as, say, there was a riot or a killing or some sort of major event, and that they needed to then respond to that and make changes to their tool, they could do that on a very rapid basis because they've got an ongoing continuous data collection process. Now, we haven't quite got to that in education yet, but that's certainly one of the things that a lot of people are looking at, and what we can then really achieve once we've got that very dynamic change process occurring. Because it's not just a matter of identifying that a change should happen, we also have to have processes that can respond to such changes rapidly enough in education. And traditionally, education hasn't been very responsive to change, and changes have taken a long time. So it's there's two components of that. One is being able to identify that a change should happen, but also then having the capacity to make that change. And we've got quite a while to go before we can achieve that in education. An individual teacher might be able to achieve it, say from feedback at the end of a class, and then make changes for the next lesson, or even through questioning during a class, and then make changes depending upon how they've structured their lessons during the actual lesson itself. But that's more difficult as you get a larger, more complex organisation involved in that process. Assessing and utilising student information, very much on the same vein. Once you've got this sort of data and can assess how students are going, then you can use historical data to make predictions and profile students based upon how students in the past have performed and what they've been able to do, and then make interventions based upon those profiles. Now, you do need to have good, reliable data to be able to make those profiles, because sometimes they can be problematic. Of course, you may misprofile a student because, say, for example, in streaming, where a student may be streamed into a low performance class based upon their performance in years 8 and 9, but they might suddenly bloom and become a very accomplished student who could quite easily perform at a much higher level, but because of their previous performance and the profile that they developed, they were then put into a particular set of opportunities, and that may not be most appropriate for them. So data needs to be effectively utilised and ideally continuously interrogated so that aberrations such as that can be addressed and we don't use data inappropriately. Any comments or questions about any of that? Okay, we'll keep pushing through the elements. Making sure that everyone's got access to resources is an important aspect in any school environment or learning environment. So for example, everyone having access to iPads is a problematic aspect because there's only certain things that can work on iPads. So for example, if you're using the particular interactive iBooks, you need to have iPads to be able to use those, although now you can also use them on Apple computers, but you can't use those resources on Microsoft computers, for example, or those running the Microsoft operating system. So the idea of making sure that you have the right mix of technology and tools and that they're equitable and that all the students have got access to opportunities through the use of those technologies is important. But there's other issues that we need to make sure that we adhere to, things such as copyright and address issues around plagiarism and responsible use of information and technology. So lots of elements there that can be considered and incorporated into your planning around the effective use of technology. Then there's aspects of automation where we can automate things to make them more efficient. So for example, having an automated system for taking the school roll, where the students all use their swipe cards to indicate that they're present and don't have to spend a certain percentage of the teaching time identifying which students are in attendance or not each lesson. But likewise, having automated processes around behaviour management, where students that have behavioural issues are put into a database, and that can then, as a new issue arises, it can be flagged as to their previous difficulties and problems, and depending upon the behaviour management plan, it may flag that a certain next level of behaviour management needs to be implemented based upon that existing data. So there can be lots of ways of automating things, having report cards automated through use of comment banks and sometimes even automatically generated based upon student results and performance. Can be a way some schools can improve time management and efficiencies and workloads. But behind the scenes, there's also lots of other business processes that can be automated, such as, say, staff, payments, and a whole range of other elements, as most businesses have automated many of their systems. Generally in education, we've been fairly poor at automating things because we're focused on the educational aspects, which tend to resist automation because of the relationship focus around education. But increasingly, there is more and more automation. In this course, for example, you get the opportunity to do those quizzes and that they're automatically marked, although some of them I have to go in and mark because of their more comment-based processes. But the whole idea is that they can be done at your own pace, and I don't have to have everyone do all the quizzes at one time so that then I can mark them all at once. They can be done as they're needed to through the automated processes available through the website. So lots of different examples of automation that can be incorporated into a learning environment to address the issues around differentiation and individualization in particular. Any comments on that? Any examples or aspects around automation? Anyone still there?
No, I'm still here. You're covering everything, so it's actually, yeah.
Okay, just checking. Okay, last element, element 10. Making sure that the school or the educational environment has a good, reliable infrastructure. Of course, it's nothing worse than having this fantastic plan to do this wonderful stuff and then the technology failing on you and having to then revert back to using some other plan B because the technology hasn't worked out as was expected. Now, this will always happen with technology because if you're being innovative and you're pushing the bounds of what technology can accomplish, then there'll always be glitches. But in the main, we need to make sure that things get more and more reliable over time so that the planning that's put in place and the expectations of the use of ICT and technology is not disrupted. And there's lots of ways of achieving that around providing training for staff and students in the use of technology, but also training and professional development in coping with difficulties and changes, and pedagogical approaches that can incorporate that. A lot of teachers use technical difficulties as an excuse not to proceed with some pedagogical changes, but there are generally ways of coping with difficulties with technology, and they can be incorporated into teachers' planning processes and so forth. The whole idea is if a school's internet connection drops out for a week, what would happen in that environment? That can freak out many schools where they've become very reliant upon the use of that technology, but there needs to be plans in place for if the technology does fail and how to cope with that and to ensure that the learning processes can continue. It's not that hard to do that because it generally means reverting back to existing practices before the widespread implementation of that technology, but it can be a very significant one, particularly when a school becomes very reliant upon the advantages of technology. There still needs to be plans put in place that if that technology does fail or has difficulties, that the learning and teaching processes can still occur. And a good technical support staff and infrastructure will incorporate those planning processes. But sometimes schools do forget to do that. And then if a problem does come, such as a cyclone or a flooding event, then there can be difficulties. Any comment?
Is it most schools should pretty much be in the accomplished school section then for this one, wouldn't they? I mean, most Australian schools or Queensland schools would be quite accomplished in this specific element, wouldn't they? Hope.
In the main, yes, because we've put a lot of financial resources into maintaining or making sure that we had good, reliable infrastructure. That's one thing the governments have put a lot of focus in, primarily because it's something that they can easily measure, and they're used to doing that in non-school environments, making sure that they've got reliable infrastructure and technical support. So they've been able to transition what's happening in other industries, including their own departmental support structures, and can see how that can then be applied into education. So in the main, we're doing a reasonably good job around infrastructure. That said, I don't think schools are doing a particularly good job around planning and for variations in that infrastructure. So for example, if there was a major flood event, how would schools cope with making sure that their students could still keep learning even if they couldn't attend school because of the floods? How could they make sure they could get resources out to schools and to parents and keep the learning process going through a natural disaster of that nature? Not too many schools have got plans around that. Some do, but not everyone does. So there's a whole range of other opportunities there that could be explored around providing reliable infrastructure. What happens if, you know, a laptop school, when a student loses their laptop or has it break? Is there a really good, reliable replacement process or other strategy in place that can ensure that the learning process continues? So little things like that can become quite significant on a large scale. And they're not that difficult to develop good processes and plans in place to address those. But unless that thinking processes have gone through, we then tend to rely upon reactions and fairly poorly thought through plans happening on the fly rather than well integrated, considered plans. Okay, so the final aspect from these readings is around the idea of the developing school and sorts of perspectives summarized there. You've got the accomplished school, and then you've got the lead school. And the idea is that schools continue across that spectrum. Very few schools would be leading in all areas. And once we get, as I said before, once we get a sufficient number of schools in the leading stage and most schools in the accomplished stage, then we'll come up with a new set of standards and expectations that can allow progressions into the future. So for example, once we've got robotic teaching happening and artificial intelligence processes occurring in schools, we'll need a whole new set of processes that need to incorporate those new ICTs. But for the current sort of expectations around ICT in schools, this is a reasonably good benchmark as to what would be expected. I am involved in a couple of groups that are looking at the really digital schools that have fully incorporated digital technologies, and in those sets of criteria, the leading schools here would be considered the developing schools. But that's a new set of expectations that is just slowly being developed, and in that we've only identified 2 or 3 schools in Australia that are at the leading level, with most schools, the vast majority, at the developing level. So these standards do change all the time, but this is a reasonably good set of commonly accepted standards that have been developed across all of our states in Australia as to what the expectations are for learning in an online world at the moment. And they can be used to inform your second assignment when you come to set your own expectations about what you would like to develop in a learning organisation. Any final questions for this evening?
Can I ask you which school belongs to leading school in Australia?
There are a few that are sort of considered at the very cutting edge. Not Northern Rivers. There's one in Sydney, Northern something in Sydney is one of the leading schools that's really incorporated a lot of digital technology aspects into their school. And there's a couple of other ones that have got similar approaches. What is the name of that school? I'm just doing a quick Google for it. I think it might be Northern Beaches. Yeah, I'd have to check, but I think it's Northern Beaches. But I could be wrong. I'll look that up and tell you next week. Okay. Any other aspects for this evening? So we're working through a range of new elements that are going to inform how you develop your implementation plan for your second assignment. And we'll progressively get into more and more detail into those as we go over the next few weeks. But other than that, good luck with your assignment for this week. Make sure you get it in on time and everything. And I'll see you all again next week.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Emma.
Okay then. Good night all.